Mr. Jon Gallo. How are you doing, sir?
How you doing? How are you? How are you in the family, Kevin?
We're good, man. We're good. We're surviving just like anybody else, I think, right? This new normal of either working from home or limited work hours and trying to manage that work-life balance right now. It's pretty interesting. How are you guys making it on your side?
Good, good. We, our three kids are in school, and obviously, and just learning to adapt to the challenges and find order inside this chaos.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. Well, I thought it'd be super helpful for a lot of people just to get a little bit of background on your story. I've known you for a long, long time. You've got a super unique background with respect to how you got started in the business and your sort of your upbringing before getting into business. So, why don't we start there? Talk to us a little bit about Jon Gallo, um, maybe a little bit about your military background and how you transitioned from military into what you're doing today.
Yeah, I did about 17 years in the army before I became an accountant. I was an infantry officer, so spent a lot of time overseas, lots of time in different parts of the world, doing my craft, so to speak.
Right.
So where I think what's interesting about leaving the military, I left in Christmas 2008, and so it's been just over 10 years, almost 11 years now, actually. Is that you know being in the civilian world and in business in general, though things are changing. Um, you know, there's different environmental factors that affect business. There's a sense of constantality in terms of uh, if you do this and that out some externalities, outcomes are fairly predictable, and that wasn't necessarily what the army was like. Certainly not on missions. We always had a saying: the enemy has a vote, right? So whether you're deployed in Afghanistan or Iraq, you might have a beautiful plan, but the enemy has a vote. Um, and I think what's similar to that life and that profession and what's happening today with everyone is that we're operating in a complete environment of chaos where, when you do your environmental scans and you're trying to assess the situation, there are things coming at you that you never really planned for and knew of, probably never in any business manual or MBA. And they're coming at you at a velocity that is probably a factor of 10 times anything that ever came at you before. So that creates, what I'd call, the perfect chaos storm. And so you have to be able to prepare to be operating that chaos storm without any sort of manual on how to act. Um, so that's where the similarities come from. And there's a lot of hardship out there for sure. All of us have been affected, our businesses, our families, but there is also an element of what I would say of I won't, coolness is probably not the right word, but certainly the stress is invigorating, right? This sort of rapid change and constant change and the velocity of change in what I call COVID-19 business, I suppose, is invigorating, right? It requires you to show up every single day. You can't just mail it in, right? And that's fun, right? I mean, you're a high level sports athlete, and when you got on that ice, you could never just mail it in because
Yeah.
the bench would then be your new operating environment.
And it's changing daily. Like every day you wake up and it's rapid change, and our ability to have to adapt in that change is our normal right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just look at the current sort of public discourse around face masks, right? You have very smart, intelligent people with decades of education and experience in the medical field saying two opposing different things, and they probably both have merits. I'm not in a position to say either way, but it does create chaos in society. Like who do you follow, right? What do you do? And you generally in our society got comfort in what the professionals said because they have decades of training and experience and education, and it's changing, right? So what do you do, right? And no one has the answer for that. You can't look on the web, you can't call someone. You just have to use common sense, create your own operating framework and execute within that framework to the best of your abilities.
So let's go back to that. You left the military. You've been out of the military for now for 11 years. So that point in time is not unlike a lot of people right now, where they've left a job to pursue something an unknown or another job, or they've been laid off or what have you. That point in your life when you moved from the military, I'm not sure how long it took you to form Gallo and Associates and what you were doing up until that point, but that was a lot of unknown, right? Um, how did you manage yourself and some of those unknowns when you moved from the military to the accounting world?
Yeah, I was so when I left the military, I was involved in some pretty pointy end organizations. I was an officer. I was in charge of people. Um, you could say you're at the top of your game, and I left very abruptly to just transition family for family reasons. So I think the the hardest thing about that was I went from uh, a position of where people needed you and to make decisions, and you were looked upon, and you were involved in this greater purpose. Right, we were in the midst of the Afghan war. Uh, you know, uh, I mean, historians will say whether that was the right one or not, but certainly we felt there was a purpose. Right, we were defending our nation. We were helping a people become better. So you're involved, a part of a higher purpose, right? And then that all ends. And I left at Christmas 2008, and I got my first job with PwC articling in September 2009. So I really had 9 months, and I had to do some upgrading. So the hardest thing about that was I went from going to work and being responsible for soldiers' lives to sitting at home taking online courses. And the hardest thing about that was checking your ego. All of us, and it's just, I think it's human nature. You start to define yourself about who you are and what you do, and we dress a certain way, we act a certain way because that fits into our cultural norms about who we are. And when it changed for me, essentially in a matter from pre-Christmas to January 1, I had to rethink that, and that was hard. That was really, really hard. And the only way for what worked for me, I suppose, is that I had to sit back and say, Johnny, it's time to check your ego. What you were is not what you are, and what you will be isn't what you were. And that was hard. And it didn't happen overnight. It took months and arguably probably years before you could. I had to check that and say, that was a great time. That was a great part of who I was, but that's not who I'm going to be. It certainly forms part of me, and the fundamentals will never be lost. But there's a saying in the special forces is you're only as good as yesterday.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what you did before; it's what you do tomorrow. So that was the biggest thing, is checking your ego, and having to learn that you have to prove yourself each and every day, either to yourself, to your family, to your new job. It didn't matter. And I think, as Mr. Kenny said yesterday, it was his address to the province, if it gets to 25% unemployment, people will have to do things differently. You will be starting a new career, and it's going to be very hard for people, and there'll be some significant mental distress. But the only way to survive it is to say, that's what I was, that's what it used to be, but tomorrow is different, and I'm going to embrace the change. Because if you don't do that, I think you can spiral quite quickly as an individual and your mental health. And I think that's something that I think we as a society will really have to embrace, is that yesterday didn't matter, tomorrow does. So let's move together.
And the fact of the matter is also, when I look back when I moved from hockey into real estate, my passion is now real estate, but it took a while to become passionate about something else other than real estate, which I'm sure is the same to you when you moved from military to accounting. You just didn't become instantly passionate about accounting. It took some while to adapt and get good at something else and be passionate about something else. And so,
all right. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
no, and being open to that change is easy to say, hard to implement, especially when there's a bunch of chaos around you, right? Um, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think purpose is important, and I know we use it in businesses and it's mantras nowadays. You go on YouTube and what's your purpose, but I think it's really important. I think what binds you as a hockey team or a military organization, small unit or otherwise, is what's your purpose, um, because that is something I think as humans we need to bind together. Like you have to bind yourself to a purpose, because
Mhm.
if you don't, when it gets hard, you start questioning, why are you getting out of bed today, right? Do I have to put a tie on? I put a tie on every day,
Yeah,
even though we see very few clients anymore. Um, you know, the joke with whether it's Zoom or FaceTime or whatever is, who's wearing their pants or whatever,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
exactly.
it's important to understand that would associate with a purpose and will define how you act, right? Like if you look in, I think I didn't play high level hockey, but there's lots of similarities I think with high performance teams and high performance military units. Is we used to have a saying, check your corners, right? When you went into a room when you do some close quarter combat and stuff like that. I think it's no different in hockey, right? Finish your check, and you take those basic habits into your business, right? Finishing your check means do your paperwork right. Don't rush it, right? Cross your T's, dot your I's. And those lessons learned on the ice or, in the sands or mountains of Afghanistan are very, very pertinent to how you and I will do our jobs and ultimately help our clients, right? So,
I
um,
agree.
yeah,
Well, so let's look at that time frame in your life. You went from, was it PwC? Sorry,
yeah. I started
PwC.
articling at PwC. Then I moved over to M&P. And then once I got my designation, I started pretty much about 4 or 5 months. I started my own practice, Gallo and Company,
And so, how long has Gallo and Company been in business for?
2012. I started
2012.
with myself and two people, 2.5 people, and staff. And now, pre-COVID, before we did our layoffs, we were about 25 people.
25 people
Hmm.
with two offices now.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's take a step. Let's look at that a little bit. So we have you now are in a position where um, we're in COVID. You have two offices. You have numerous staff. They have families. How do you utilize your leadership, and how have you had to mentor and empathize and sympathize with people during this time, but also run a business, right? It's not, it's the human aspect of it,
Hmm.
um, and then incorporating that with the business side of your practice.
Yeah, I think we I was fortunate enough to be in London at the London Business School up till the 9th of March. And I say that only because I was on a course with about 70 people, and probably 80% of them were from outside of North America, predominantly from the Eurasia marketplace, Hong Kong, Singapore,
Yep.
China, India. And they were telling us stories about what was going on, and how it was affecting their businesses. And at that point, we were kind of hearing about it, but it was still kind of a Chinese problem or an Asian problem at the very least. And they were saying, no, it's going to be significant. And outside of the science and all that stuff, but the effects on business are going to be significant. So I got back on the 9th of March, on the 12th, MBA and all that sort of stuff closed down. So I knew it was happening pretty quickly, and I had kind of some forewarning from my friends who I attended a course in London with. So what I did was that first weekend, I brought all my leadership into the office on Saturday, and we spent 4 hours, and I led them through what we used to call in the military the OPP, operational planning process.
Yeah.
I wanted to come up with I wanted to walk them through some scenarios. So hopefully we could come to a conclusion jointly. I sort of knew in the back of my head where we had to go, but I was open to debate and changing. And after about 4 hours, and quite frankly, some very open, frank discussion, some anger, some frustration, some heated debate. We started from principles at the beginning of the planning process to actual tangible outcomes And there's a whole planning process around there that I use that really is fundamental to operational planning in the military. Use some processes like what we call the OODA loop: observe, orientate, decide, act. There's a lot of research on it in MBAs and stuff like that. It started with a man by the name of Sir John Boyle. He was a fighter pilot in Korea, and it started, and that was really the first sort of formulaic planning process that eventually went to business. And there's lots of business papers on the OODA loop, and I ran my team through that. Starting from what's the environmental scan? What do we know? What do we feel about that? And that was outside of accounting, but just in general business in Canada. And then what core principles would we want to use in an emergency situation? And we started with about 6 or 7, and we boiled them down to about 4 core principles. And then we ran the firm through those principles from a worst case to best case scenario. And it came out with some outcomes. And then we eventually had to decide what does it look like? What are our I call them triggering mechanisms of making decisions, so decision points. And within 3 or 4 days, we saw those triggering mechanisms force us to make some pretty hard decisions, and for the sake of the firm. And it was always under the underlining principle that we wanted to recover as quickly as possible. So we had to do things to make sure that our recovery we'd be in the strongest position to recover. So we immediately, I think we're probably 3 weeks ahead of most people on layoffs. And did we have to do them necessarily that day? Probably not. And that was a hard decision. But looking back today, 3-4 weeks later, they were the right ones, because the vector, the trajectory was certainly what we anticipated.
Yeah, interesting.
That was hard. Those were hard conversations. I did them personally with every one of the 6 people we laid off. We keep in contact with them, and our full intention is to bring them back.
And there's no guarantees in that, though, right? Like
No,
you as a company, you're prepared to move forward without them. Not ideal, obviously, for anybody, but the leadership that you showed and the foresight to get ahead of it, and to to have involvement of your core group, because without involvement, there's no commitment.
yeah,
So
I wanted buy-in because they were tough decisions.
yeah.
I wanted buy-in. I mean, interesting during the conversations, and this wasn't wrong. This wasn't bad comments, but it certainly showed the diversity of thinking in the leadership group. Some of the comments were like, "Well, no one else is doing it. What happens if they go to other firms? Right?
Right.
We'll lose them forever, right? Because the thought, well, if we lay them off, someone else will hire them, and then we'll lose them, and they're great people. We spent years training them." And that just showed the diversity of where people were mentally in terms of how serious this is. We know today now there's been layoffs in our profession throughout the province that those risks just aren't there right now.
Mm. Amazing.
But yeah, buy-in it was super important, and I would say we left there not happy. Like we weren't proud of what we had to do. Or not, I shouldn't, proud is not the right word. We weren't looking forward to the actions that we would have to do in the subsequent few days, but we were comforted in the fact that we had come to a conclusion that we all accepted as the most probable outcome based on the information we knew at hand.
Well, in your profession has lent you well to working with a lot of different companies in our market.
Mm-hmm.
What,
Yeah, I mean, sorry.
how has your leadership skills and how has speaking with other companies either altered your train of thought, saying, you know what, we should have done things differently, or we need to implement something differently? Or how has it said that, you know what, we've made the right decision, this is what more a company should be doing based on those conversations you're having?
Yeah, the conversations we're having right now with clients, uh, mostly me, with the owners of the companies is, um, a few weeks ago they would say, "Well, John, you're being too much of just a numbers guy. You're just looking at the numbers." And I'm like, "Well, yes, I'm looking at the numbers, but I'm not concerned about today. but I'm worried about 5 or 6 or 7 months. How are we crawling ourselves out of, how are you crawling your company out of this? And what do you need today to set yourself up for success tomorrow? And a lot of them were like, well, this is unbelievable. Someone's going to have to help us. Some external factor is going to jump in. And my comments were, you can't make decisions on things you can't control. So you can't control what government will or will not do. And this isn't a slag about what government's doing. They're doing the best they can. You have to take control of what you can control and make decisive actions. If other factors come into play a few weeks or months down the road, you can alter your course, but you need to make decisions with what you can control today. A lot of people disagreed with me on that, and we had these good, healthy conversations. Today, and then subsequent to those, they're like, "See, John, things are coming out." But today, we look at what's the programs that have come out, and some certainly they're helpful, but they're not going to solve the problems, right? We're still going to see mass unemployment. The national economy, not let alone the provincial economy, is the professionals, the economists will debate it, but I think everyone knows that minimum 12 months, it's going to be rough, regardless of what programs come into place. So the conversations now are like, okay, John, I get it. I wasted 2, 3, 4 weeks. Now let's build a business that's sustainable at levels 10 to 15% below this and execute on it today. We're using abstract words, but really what it comes down to is hitting, payroll, which is unfortunate. But that's what it really comes down to, is doing things smarter, hitting payroll, and with the objective of, this isn't about the socialist diatribe of business owners getting wealthier, right? This is about just keeping your business alive so you can hire back the people and collectively move the economy forward again.
So let's expand on business and your business. You own multiple businesses. One of your businesses is commercial real estate. So the building that you're in right now is a building that you and partners own.
That's right.
And you're dealing with businesses on the retail side of things that are hard hit right now. So how has that business, commercial real estate, been impacted? What type of conversations are you having with your tenants? And based on your accounting background, does that change the way you view some of the requests that tenants are making to you right now?
Yeah, I find myself in an interesting position because a lot of my clients are the tenants, right? Are the doctors or the dentist offices or the restaurants that are in these buildings, but I'm also a landowner and I have some clients that are landowners. And so I hear it from both sides and I see both sides. The conversations I'm having with landlords or landowners and tenants are exactly the same. What's the definition of success in 6, 7, or 8 months from now? Notwithstanding what the banks are willing to do and some deferrals that they're willing to do, what does success look like in 7 or 8 months? So with the landowners, I'm saying, does success look like a bunch of boarded up shops, you having to try to fill space with new tenants, or does success look like break even, maybe taking a little bit of hit this year, but having a building that has traffic and tenants that may not be perfect, may not be super healthy, but they're operating and they have a path to success in 12 to 24 months. So I could tell you what success looks like, but you have to ask yourself deep down, what does success look like? Because some landowners will say, no, it's a great time to then tear down if all my tenants lose their leases and I'm going to go from there. Maybe that's right, maybe it's not, but define what success looks like, not today, but in 7 months. Because a lot of people, if they say what success looks like today, is getting my monthly rent check, right? And then from the tenant perspective, it's not paying this month. But if you look at what success looks like in and I think you have to look midterm. So I'm defining currently in an environment of chaos and rapid change, I'd call midterm really 6 to 9 months, not 24 to 36 months, but really what does the fall look like? And define what that looks like and then execute actions today that get you there. So you have to look midterm right now. And then with my tenants, I'm saying the same thing. I go, listen, uh, you can, you can lock it up, put your head in the sand, cry, and maybe you need to do that for 1 or 2 days, but then you got to get on with it, right? And we are seeing some intervention with these businesses, with these tenants, to try to maintain some sort of minimal cash flow, um, and then bridging that gap. And I think I think honestly, it's a collective movement forward to see some sort of moderate success in the fall. And that's what I'm looking at right now. Saying, what does September, October look like?
And that's interesting because we've chatted about it before, just on business owners, and in your case, tenants for your buildings, having to sort of redefine how they operate to actually continuing to operate in today's marketplace, where they've had to adapt, but have been sort of slow to sort of come and think creatively, which they've never had to done because they've never been in this situation before.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we've talked about that. Does your investment thesis with your current buildings change given today's marketplace?
I would say it does a little bit for sure. I would say my general investment thesis um, would have been, to, you know, you like to have buildings with some really kind of, great tenants, anchor tenants. I mean, that's the lingo of the industry. Great covenants. We're talking national tenants.
Yeah.
I think as a landlord of commercial retail, and retail being essentially B2C sort of business, doesn't matter if it's clothing, food, or even professional services, is that uh, diversity, smaller spaces is probably going to be the way forward from a de-risk perspective. So putting a lot of effort into getting that big anchor tenants that takes up a lot of space and has a lot of risk associated with it, though unavoidable in certain circumstances, is maybe not generally the go-to sort of action. Like if you can diversify your space out, like, I mean, before this recording, you had talked about satellite offices with inside your business. So how do you kind of set that up? Because if we come out of this in September, October, November, balance sheets are going to be super weak. But there might be opportunities if you see this mass unemployment. People are going to reinvent themselves, and it might be small businesses, it might be more owner-managed businesses. They might be taking shots at different ways to do retail and touching customers, and that may require a rethinking of what we provide those customers to us in terms of land of building use, right? So yeah, I think I'm certainly starting to think about what that looks like if we have a population that says, you know what, I don't want to go work in another big business. I want to try something myself. This is the opportunity I've been looking for. How will we help them move forward? And most retail is a hybrid of web and internet and some sort of physical sort of space. So how can we help? I think it comes down to maybe smaller spaces, different ways to look at leases, um, and more flexibility for them to try, right? So do you develop spaces inside your buildings where they become trial spaces for little businesses, incubators? They get 12 months. If they can't succeed and move to a bigger space, they're out, and you try someone else. I don't know, but I think there'll be intervention in that in our business to help people take swings at business for sure.
So what does 12 months from now, 6 months from now, when we, knock on wood, move through this, what does the investment landscape look like for commercial real estate? Are there going to, you're in retail right now, and I have a lot of clients that have had to have mortgage deferrals just because of the tenants requesting deferrals on their side.
Yeah, and I'm one of them, right?
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't have my ego isn't there saying we're good and we got everyone paying. No, we've asked for those same deferrals, 100%.
Yeah, and I have clients that don't have any income coming in at all from their tenants. right now for a whole building. So what does that look like coming out of this 6-12 months from now from an investment side of things? Knock on wood, everybody, we can come back. Retail remains strong. People redefine themselves. Rental rates, tenants come back and say, you know what, I can make my business work paying mid-teens to high 30s, whatever that number is in
Mhm.
our world. Do you foresee there to be? It's tough to look at this right now because there's a lot of stuff going on that's hard and it's not good. What does the investment thesis look like for you? And do you foresee there to be any opportunities in 6 to 12 months? And what opportunities do you see there's going to be?
Yeah, so I'm concerned from an investor's perspective what it will look like in 6 to 12 months. There are going to be winners, out of this. It will most likely be large players who aren't very leveraged, who might be sitting on a bunch of cash and not have much leverage on their buildings, and they're going to be able to do some acquiring, and good for them. But I think it could be unhealthy for generally for the landscape in general, because you'll have a consolidation of retail space, which will provide less options to the operator. So I'm concerned about that. But I think there will be opportunities um, to the extent that landlords have open communication with tenants, right? So, tenants don't generally want to pay much, but they want everything, right? So, the nicest buildings, uh, the nicest kind of artwork and all that sort of stuff, but that comes at a cost. So so the opportunity will be, I think, better communication between landlords and tenants. And I think that's a win for everybody in the industry, where, if we get into a habit of actually thinking that we're in business together, it's a very symbiotic relationship, you know, um, that brings me back to that South Korean movie that just came out. We have to work together and live together, and our success as landlords are the success of the tenants. And I think that will be the positive thing that comes out of that, particularly for the small investor who is leveraged. I think that will be a key to their success. It'll be interesting to see how the banks respond to this, because um, the banks have been very good at deferrals and what have you. And, there's been a lot of communication in the landowner space, well, I'll defer it, but I'm not going to forgive the rent. And I'm not saying that's not a wrong position to be in, but I'll say once again, what does success look like in 8 months from now? Um, and it may lead you to say that you need to forgive a certain portion for a certain amount of people on an individual, who knows, right? But I don't think the banks are there yet. And if the banks ask themselves, what does success look like? Um, I don't think it looks like them holding the keys to a bunch of retail spaces.
Absolutely.
So I think, that as much as I think the landowners and the tenants have to have open communication, the banks are going to also have to have that open communication. I think that will also be a place for the politicians to step in.
Interesting. Yeah,
So,
interesting.
and I don't know, but I know I was talking to my wife last night. Mr. Kenny had said, no one can be evicted out of their apartments during this COVID-19. He gave a date, whether that gets extended or not, I don't know. But nothing's come from the federal government saying the Bankruptcy Act, and you can't foreclose on retail buildings. No one's talked about that yet, and I'm not saying they should, but it's certainly a level of thought to say we're in this together. So, I think as a landowner, if rent forgiveness becomes, or lease forgiveness becomes a lot more of a reality if interest forgiveness becomes a reality on parts of the bank, right? And you're
Mhm.
flowing it right through. That's teamwork, right? Going back to my old profession, right? If you have one canteen of water, everyone gets a sip, everyone wins together.
And I think we had a call yesterday as a company, and a lot of our multi-family clients, with respect to that eviction, where you can't evict anybody, you don't have to pay rent.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the rent payment for April was at about 85%
Yeah, it
uh,
was. Yeah.
in their buildings, which is from what you hear in the marketplace, that's a success. So that means that there's some good communication going on between landlord and tenants,
Mhm.
um, and knowing that everybody's in this together,
Yeah.
right? How can I help you?
I think one of the biggest success factors in that market was a lot of my clients who own multifamily said, "Show me your ROE. If you've been laid off, show me your ROE, and we will talk." And that 85% is probably pretty congruent to who's been laid off and who hasn't been, right?
Yeah.
With in the commercial space, it's a lot harder because some businesses are operating at much reduced revenues, but are operating. So there's going to have to be some sort of that open communication and trust, some verification of how the business performance is actually occurring. Going. So I know in our firm, in the accounting firm, we've developed a very low cost product that we've launched this week for landowners to say, okay, for $150, we'll do a third party income and expense verification of your tenants, and so that the tenants are comfortable, it's a third party, the landowners are comfortable, it's a third party. It's immensely reduced pricing, $150 per tenant, and then they have a common framework, landowner and tenant, to discuss what's going to happen. Because I've heard some landowners say, well, they're still operating. How do I know how much they're making? Yada, yada, yada. So I think these sort of innovative things will help dialogue happen between owner and tenant.
Interesting. Very good, my friend. I think to finish, does what is happening in the market today change how you look to operate either your accounting practice or your commercial real estate practice?
Um, well, for the commercial real estate, I mean, we put an offer out this week on another property, right? Certainly the due diligence, it's not going to, I mean, the seller, wanted 45 days and, the same typical sort of stringent conditions. And we said to them, listen, like, we're going to sign this now, but most likely we're coming back. It helps no one to try to force a deal right now because no one feels comfortable. So if we're comfortable enough to make an offer, people have to provide enough time to get over that comfort, or things just won't happen. So no, we're still offering. It's going to take us longer. We're going to be more cautious. We're not going to take big swings right now because the cash reserves aren't there, and there's no the backup plans aren't as strong. So the big swings aren't going to be there for us, but we're still going to swing. Life goes on. The sun will come up, and the crops will be plowed, right? So we have to keep on moving forward. From an accounting business perspective, no, we're still gonna provide that great service. We're certainly doing a lot more online communication. We set up some web pages to because the information is so fast paced. That's changed a little bit. We have staff working at home and that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, no, it won't change. We're still a human business, and it's going to continue to be a human business.
Right. Well, good. Well, stay well. All the best to you and your family and your staff, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, take care and have a great week.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Bye.